Welcome to Hunters and Unicorns, the Sales Leaders Playbook. Today we welcome Jeff Lortz, COO at Tomia. Jeff is a legend in the Valley for building some of the most robust operations functions to deal with the fastest growing, most aggressive sales organizations. Watch this episode to discover what happens when sales and operations are in harmony. Edition series, the 33 CxOs, we investigate one of the greatest success stories in the history of software sales. 33 CxOs learnt the playbook from one man, John McMahon, a legacy which stretches back to the late 90s at a company called PTC. They were later reunited at BladeLogic, which was acquired by BMC. What happened next was truly remarkable. These CxOs went on to become the most prolific sales leaders in the software industry. They've raised over $22 billion in VC funding. They contribute to 4% of software turnover globally, 26 unicorns, 8 decacorns, and the companies they drive have a combined valuation of $230 billion. At Hunters and Unicorn, we're revealing their playbook.
I'm Simon Cootis, and I'm joined by my co-host Ollie Kune.
Hey.
And we are delighted to welcome Jeff Lortz. Jeff, welcome.
Welcome, Jeff.
So, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. So, Jeff, you're currently Chief Operating Officer at Tomia, which is part of the Vista Equity Partners company. Can you tell us a little bit about Tomia and your role there?
Sure, absolutely. So I am the Chief Operating Officer of Tomia. Tomia is a brand that was created at the beginning of 2019. Vista, purchased a company called Telerex in 2016. It's a company that provides enterprise software into the tier 1 telco carrier space. Fairly complex, solutions. A lot of heavy lifting in terms of system integration, right, to deploy those solutions, integration with complex network switches, etc. Vista's plan was to, kind of improve the operational capability of that company, and then use it as a platform to acquire, new assets, right, that they can use to sort of leverage EBITDA growth and make a value play. With that company, I joined in early 2018 as the Chief Operating Officer, part of the an overall renaissance of the management team. And my responsibilities include professional services, customer support, all of the sort of customer-facing functions like customer success. We have a hosting operation because we have a SaaS product. I manage the SaaS operations as well. And then have some responsibilities in the area of business operations and sales ops, as well as I'm really sort of the right-hand man of the CEO and helping with operational planning, business planning, governance, and internal communication. In early 2019, we bought a company based in Israel called Star Homak that was actually twice as large as Telerex. And worked over the course of 2019 to integrate the two companies together. Once we completed that merger, we actually created the brand Tomia, right, as a combined entity, and went to market with that brand in early 2019.
Sure, great. Now, the topic that we're talking about today, Jeff, you're obviously very passionate about this topic. It's almost as though every time we talk about this, your face kind of lights up, and it fills you with pride to see the success that this group have actually had. Why is that?
I think you guys are really onto something, because I do think it's an amazing set of circumstances and a great story, because it's a story that actually repeated. We started, I think, the journey at a company called PTC. It was at that time known as Parametric Technology. And Parametric Technology was in the mechanical design and automation space. So basically, CAD/CAM software, if you're familiar with that. They sold to manufacturing companies and really had a software that revolutionized mechanical design, introduced a completely new paradigm of designing things, that are mechanical in nature, right? Called solid modeling is what they invented, right? And they were upsetting the market, with this new technology. And they were doing it, faster than any of their nearest competitors. So it was really an opportunity to kind of figure out how to take advantage of that leadership opportunity and scale, a company globally as fast as you can possibly scale it to gain as much market share as possible, during that period of time. And they did it in a very, very successful way. So the challenge was really about, scaling a distribution channel that was, I would say fundamentally 100% direct. There was, attempts to facilitate a channel model in sort of the mid-market and lower market, but really the success was really in their ability to sort of drive scale in a direct, selling model. And it wasn't just how they scaled; it was all of the things around scaling, right, that made them successful. It was the methodology, it was the people, and it was the way they led their sales team that really made it super successful, and it became almost a formula. And as we sort of got to the late 1990s and into the sort of the .com bubble, I guess. A number of folks, started to leave the company to go. They were attracted away to become, millionaires and zillionaires, great .com companies, and the team started to dismantle a little bit. The growth of the company had started to flatten out, and I for one did the same thing. I left in 2000 to join a company called Bow Street, which at the time was on the cover of Red Herring, and it had all of the the glitz associated with a company that was going to make it big. It was a software that nobody actually knew what it did, and that was probably our strategic advantage, because it had so much glitz around it that people bought it just because everybody else was buying it, not because they knew what it actually did. So there was a lot of that going on. So a lot of the folks that sort of built and managed and grew PTC started to disband and to go off and use what they learned in different careers. And there was very few companies that I would say at that time that more than a couple of PTC people went to. We all kind of went in our different directions for the most part, whether it be sales leaders. I was more on the operational side and professional services, but very close, tightly bound to the sales team. Everybody kind of went off in their different ways, and it was really in 2001 when the bubble burst, as everybody recalls, and there were some fairly lean years, right? After that for the high tech community, and I think it was just interesting that about 7 or 8 years later, the band kind of got back together again at BladeLogic, and really took everything that we did at PTC and used it as a model with a company that had a similar sort of footprint in terms of it was upsetting the market, with a new technology. It was kind of a greenfield market opportunity. There was some competitors, right, that actually made it a more robust market in a way, and had the same challenge. Let's build a global direct sales team, right, that scales efficiently, right, and allows us to hit, growth numbers, in a very, very predictable way, quarter after quarter, things. Everybody came back from all of their different experiences, smarter and better, and probably a little bit, fatter, maybe. And we did it again, and had a great success.
Do you think it would be unfair to say that both of those businesses, just because the technology was so good, would have achieved that anyway? Or do you think it was, Yeah,
I don't think so. I mean, I think because I've been involved in companies that have had, similar market opportunity and sort of competitive position, but they lacked a strategy, right? Which I think that you have to give some credit to the people, right, for the strategy, and then execution on the selling and delivery side. So I do think that those things are important to have. Or it makes it a lot easier. Right? But I think you can do it, with the right team and with the right methods, right, and with the right leadership, without question.
You say it was repeated. It was started at PTC and it was repeated at BladeLogic. But actually, I think the story is much bigger than that, because if you were to look at any kind of ranking of software companies, any kind of analysts that look at the rankings of organizations, you'll struggle to find organizations that are not led by one of these CxOs or that have been influenced by someone that's within this group that we're obviously talking about. So the legacy, the impact of what we're talking about isn't just about one group of people having success at PTC and then 10 years later the same group meeting again. We are talking about repeatable success again and again, and proven sales methodologies and strategies which have really been honed and improved over many, many years and have repeatable success.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no question about it. And some of those companies, I'm sure, are don't have as compelling a competitive position or a strong market, right, as we did at both BladeLogic and PTC. So I would agree. The credit goes to the people, and I think the way they developed, right. I think I look back at PTC in my own career, and I that 7 years that I was there, formed my my management capability to a great extent, and I learned the foundation of my trade there. And I learned it, in that environment, which, I've been able to sort of take and adapt over time. But they're all the same way. They were all built. They were all young. Everyone was young. Most of us didn't know what we were doing in terms of we hadn't done it before. And every step that we took along the way was a new milestone. And we had a few senior people, right? And I think back to those days. I think of when my organization moved under the CFO. For a number of years, I worked for a guy named Ed Gillis, who was a very seasoned CFO. I think he'd come from Lotus, and he's just an amazing business thinker, and taught us so much. Myself and my peers running the professional services organization. And he taught us a lot about how to run a business and how to make good decisions, and was a great mentor.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, we were making stuff up as we went along. It was just the creativity of smart people working together as a team, and building something and continuing to test it and evolve it, and it worked, right?
Yeah.
And I think everybody took it away as the foundation for how they operated going forward.
Yeah. And so on the subject of talking about your earlier career, and I suppose just to give the listeners a bit more, insight into your earlier part, and your foundations. So you graduated at university with a mechanical engineering degree. You then went on to the Navy, joined the Navy for 7 years, worked your way up to officer within nuclear power. Obviously, your technical roots are, very different to a lot of the other people within the list and the people that we're talking to. But, how important was, the Navy in shaping your career and, the early stage in creating you?
Oh, it was fundamental, and it actually was very beneficial, particularly in a culture like PTC's culture, which was really my first job out of the military. So, everybody knows that the military enforces discipline and builds character and does all of those things. And I would say for me, I was not a confident young man. In college, I was probably on the shyer side. Didn't really know where I wanted to go with my career. I ended up joining the military when I actually figured out what a mechanical engineer does every day, going to a real job. And I was very confident that I wanted to be a mechanical engineer, when I went into college, and then I realized, wow, it's not really that interesting. So, I sought out, the opportunity in the military because it was a way to apply, an engineering degree to something that seemed a lot more exciting, which is, running a nuclear power plant on a ship or submarine. So that's why I took that path. I left the military with no real marketable skills, commercially, other than, I could drive a really big ship and I could operate a nuclear power plant. So those are the tools that I brought to the market. Not very marketable, really.
For sure.
So I really stumbled into high tech. I ran into one of my colleagues. I shouldn't say colleagues, classmates, right, from my mechanical engineering degree. A guy named Pete Terrell. And Pete was working at PTC I think he was probably a district manager at the time. I ran into him somewhere in the Boston area, and he said, "Hey, you got to come to this open house. We're having it over in Waltham next week, and there's good stuff going on there. This company's on fire." I'm like, okay. So I showed up, and they were just doing mass interviews at this open house, and I interviewed a couple people, and they made me an offer to join as a professional services consultant. I had almost no marketable skills or capability associated with that, but they were just scaling and hiring, and they were just looking for people who seem like athletes, right? So if you hire a good athlete who's smart, maybe we can form them into something that will be for us. and I did have a mechanical engineering degree. We did sell our software to mechanical engineers, so I guess there was a little bit of opportunity there for me to add value. But I started out just as a billable consultant on a team implementing the technology with customers. You spend most of the time on the road on customer sites, billing hours to make revenue. And I was promoted to a team manager position probably within 6 months, right, of that. So I've been an individual contributor in my career for about 6 months total, I guess.
Wow.
And from there, because the company was scaling, I think anybody who showed any type of leadership skills or management skills or upside, right, in terms of their ability to kind of step up into another role, got the opportunity. They just gave it to you, and see how you did, because we needed managers to step up, and we were just continuing to kind of fill the bottom, with people. We were scaling the services organization, just as fast. So we needed bodies to go out and do this billable work, and we would just build a team, and then it would get so big, and we'd split it and put a director on top, and that's just the way it kind of scaled up, right? So every year or year and a half at the most, I was getting an opportunity to take a bigger team or a different kind of subset of our organization, and there was 3 or 4 of us, right, that kind of exchanged jobs. We took turns doing different jobs, and every year we kind of reorganized, the business, and had a different sort of view of the business, and continued to grow and get big. And by the time I left, I was a senior vice president. I had over 600 people, working for me around the world, $150 million worth of revenue responsibility, and all for knowing sort of nothing coming in, right? So that it was just an amazing opportunity to sort of form, the basis of a career.
And that speeding growth, we had it in our previous conversation, and we were talking about it, which is this pyramid growth scheme, which is referred to as 6 and split, building up small teams of 6. Where did that originate from? Was that PTC? Was that John McMahon? And why was it so effective in a growth strategy?
Yeah, it was PTC for sure, and it was. We didn't even at BladeLogic, we didn't even get that far, right? And we got acquired by BMC. Yeah. So we were implementing it, and we were using it as the way to kind of show our growth before the IPO and the acquisition. But PTC, we did it for years and years, right? And it proved itself out over and over again. And there was 2 aspects of it. One was you bring in the right people at the bottom. Typically, we hired very few managers, in as managers from the outside. I can't remember ever doing that. Yeah, they were all built from the bottom up, and you were mentored by your manager who had your job not that long ago, right? Potentially, and they were given the opportunity, right? Given the territory and given as much training as you could ever ask for. And given because of the low ratios they kept, there was always a focus on making sure a manager had enough time to mentor all of his people, right? So it wasn't 1 to 12, it wasn't 1 to 20, right? It was 1 to 5 or 6. When I got to 8, we'd make a new manager, right? So the manager was always really engaged, with the new people, right, that were starting to build their career. You'd give them a certain amount of time. If they couldn't make their quota, and they probably weren't going to be around for very much longer. I mean, and it was pretty cut and dry, right? You were given all the opportunity, and if you couldn't cut it, then they cut bait pretty fast.
Yeah.
It was even there was a joke that if you finish your second quarter in a row where you didn't make your number, you didn't really have to be told. You just go pack up,
walked out the door,
clean out your desk, and get out of here.
Wow. And do you think there was, because, we've had lots of conversations now, and there's certain traits which make good managers. Some people, exceptional salespeople, but it's not necessarily the exceptional salespeople, the exceptional individuals within that team that are overperforming, etc., that go on to be the managers. And there is definitely a type of profile, somebody that was described to us as somebody that is outside the limelight, doesn't necessarily need to be front of stage. What sort of traits was it that you saw that were common traits that those individuals were being promoted into management?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can tell when someone's got some inherent leadership capability. I think it was also a cultural thing where it was just strongly encouraged, and I think people felt rewarded by moving up, because there's a lot of a typical salesperson, and I know many since leaving and working at other companies. They're mercenaries. They just want to sell, and they want to make their quota, and they want to exceed their quota, and they want a great comp plan, and they want to do it over and over and over again, and they want to build their base of business, right? So that next year it'll be even easier. They don't want to have a different territory every year. They don't want to become a manager and potentially not have as much, compensation upside. But in this model, you were not necessarily financially rewarded, but you were rewarded with stature, and you were rewarded with being part of a bigger team, and people wanted to be promoted. And you don't really see that in a lot of sales organizations where people really are eager to get to the next level. The other thing that they did was you moved around, right? So if you were willing to step up into a management role, there's only so many managers in Boston, right? so if you want to be a manager and the guy next to you wants to be a manager, someone's going to have to move to Cleveland, and they did it, right? People were moving around all the time, and doing tours of duty and overseas. Most of the top executive salespeople spent at least a year or two in either Japan or in Singapore or in Europe somewhere, etc., running the business, or taking some key role, right, in another geography. So everybody gets scrambled around, and you learn so much, right? Selling into different cultures as well. But it was just made them all sort of very well-rounded, sales executives.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I think Dali Rajic is quoted saying, be careful of those that have not achieved anything outside of work. When you actually look at the group, every single one of them have achieved remarkable feats outside of work, and you included, right? We've looked, some interesting things you've done, such as the Wounded Warrior Project, Boston Cares, the Pan Mass Challenge. Do you recognize that as a common trait?
Yeah, I think so. I think part of the attributes of the people that are successful in this model is just a desire to win at almost all costs, right? Mm-hmm. So if you don't, and that's why I think a lot of the salespeople who step up to become managers do it because they want to succeed. They want to win. They want to win at a bigger level. They don't want to just make more money next year. And I think that's the case for myself as well, right? I've joined a couple of dog organizations along the way, but not as companies that didn't really have as good a prospect of success, right? And you realize it quickly that you're not in a winning culture. And either you create one or you move on and try to find one. And to me, that's the most important attribute, right, of an organization is, desire to win, right, and to do whatever it takes to get, to the finish line. First, if that doesn't exist, then I think you're not going to have the same kind of results. And these guys all had that sort of competitive drive.
For sure. So you spent a few years after PCC bouncing around to a few doggy companies. How relieved were you when you found BladeLogic?
I was very relieved, and it came out of nowhere, and it came at a good time because I was in a situation that wasn't a winning culture, for sure. And I got a call from John McMahon, who was running sales and services at BladeLogic. I had not previously heard. I guess maybe I had started to hear about it. There was some buzz because a lot of my former colleagues and people in the network were starting to talk about it, or I was hearing things about it. So it wasn't a complete surprise to me, but it was very early on, and I didn't know that much about it. So he needed someone to run, I'll call it just customer operations and pre-sales, right? As they were starting to scale. And the company was less than 30 million at the time in revenue. And it was, very, very unsexy technology. It basically, server automation, right? So in a world at the time, there were a lot of servers being provisioned in the world. There were a lot of data centers being built. Things were, we're starting to see. It wasn't quite cloud services starting to develop, but there was a lot of compute power being deployed in the world, to support sort of blossoming business applications. And at the time, it was more big ERP systems and things like that. But there were a lot of companies and outsourcers that were building big data centers, and just a lot of equipment, right, being installed into data centers. And all that equipment needed to have operating systems deployed on them. It's called bare metal provisioning. So you take just the equipment, and then you put the first layers of software, on it, which is called the bare metal provisioning process. Just includes the kernel and the operating system and the bare stuff. So what BladeLogic did was automated the deployment, right, of the bare metal provisioned software, and then afterwards provision helped with the system administration, managing patches and keeping all of the servers at the same kind of configuration settings, and being able to sort of, if you wanted to make a configuration change to one server, you might have 1,000 of them. You could push those, those configuration changes out, right, to all of your servers with just press the button. So it was kind of, not that sexy, right, but it was something that had a really good, solid ROI, and the software was good. And these guys figured out, how to sell that value proposition, how to talk to someone completely different than talking to a mechanical engineering manager, right? You're talking to IT, system administration types, data center technicians, right? Very, very different and much more technical kind of conversation. But they figured out how to, determine what were the 4 or 5 kind of key differentiators, how to talk about those differentiators, how to, translate those differentiators into capabilities, right, that the customer can see value for. And that's really the formula, right? And once you have that cookbook, right, just training people on how to talk about it, who to talk to about it, and then how to leverage your manager and your manager's manager to get connections inside these companies. It was repeated and just worked.
Yeah, and this was an interesting part, right? So, BladeLogic was then acquired by BMC for what, 800 million in 2008, which was at the time a fairly modest acquisition at best. But because BladeLogic were a smaller company, it was quite a remarkable story, right? What actually happened on that acquisition, and can you talk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, so BMC Software is a company based in Houston, Texas. It started as a mainframe, software company. So they even probably to this day have a pretty good mainframe division, believe it or not. Yeah. And the rest of the company was built on acquiring technologies and kind of consolidating them into a portfolio. So their anchor product was a product called Remedy, and they had acquired that, probably 4 or 5 years before BladeLogic, and then they acquired Patrol and a bunch of other tools. But it was basically all the tools that a CIO would need to buy in order to run his shop. And that's really what BMC software was. So companies, mainframe based, was their sort of heritage. Houston, Texas, so Midwestern, Southwestern company, much different kind of clock speed, right? Than, Boston based, formerly venture backed, recent IPO, all former sort of leading, PTC salespeople kind of running the business, very aggressive management team, right? David Echeria is, very, very aggressive guy in terms of kind of how he ran the business, and held people accountable. So the mix of the cultures was quite, odd, right? Initially.
Yeah.
But I think what BMC realized, and we actually, the acquisition closed during the sales kickoff. I don't remember what year it was now. But we were at a sales kickoff event at the Opryland Hotel in Nashville. It was 1,000 people there, right, from BMC, and it was in the middle of that 1 week sales kickoff that the actual deal closed. So in the middle of the week, we went from being a BladeLogic employee to becoming a BMC employee. But all the while, we were just mixed up with everybody. And during that period, there's all kinds of big events and presentations, and the guy, the CRO of BMC, made his sort of keynote address. And then after his keynote address, a couple of other key people spoke within the sales organization, and John McMahon was one of them. So they gave John the opportunity to get up and introduce himself and introduce BladeLogic. And after his fourth or fifth F-bomb, people started to go, "Who is this guy?" And now all the BladeLogic people already knew, and we were like cheering for him. But about 6-7 weeks later, John McMahon became the CRO of BMC Software. So they figured it out pretty fast that there was a big difference in sort of the the quality and capability, right, of the BladeLogic sales team compared to the sales team that was kind of hobbling along, right, at BMC at the time. So McMahon took over, and of course, what he does is he takes all of his former BladeLogic guys, and then he goes and hires even more, right? Because now we've got a bigger sales team. He goes funds even more former PTC guys and brings them in, and populates the entire globe, with senior former PTC people running kind of key leadership positions in each part of the world, right? And filling it in with even more, right, if you can. And that became the new fabric, right, of the BMC sales organization. And he did it in probably a year and a half.
It's a remarkable story.
It's a great story. And actually, one of the things that you will notice, one of the things that we do notice is the ability of these guys, every single one of these CxOs, their ability to scale businesses very quickly, but it's their ability to change culture, the sales culture within organizations within weeks and months. Never seen anything like it. And we've experienced it firsthand working with clients, where we've seen the difference before a kind of a BladeLogic, App Dynamic, PTC guy was in, and then after, they're able to completely transform the business from top to bottom. And it's just absolutely remarkable.
Mm.
It is, and I think it's partially, you don't have to train them, right? They already know the drill, right? They know how they're going to be asked to lead. They know exactly what the accountability environment is going to be like. And they know each other, right? In this case, so it makes it a lot easier, right? Because everyone's already kind of has read the textbook, right, and has passed the test and knows exactly how they're supposed to do it, and they're comfortable, they're comfortable exercising it, right, and actually operating it. And then at that point you can hire people off the street that don't know anything, and then you can enable them. But what was difficult at BMC, and some got on board, but most faded away, is some of the former BMC folks became and are now potentially on your list, right? They converted, right? They became they became BladeLogic people, right? Through learning and working with some of these other guys, they drank the Kool-Aid. They learned how to adapt, and some of them were more senior people that had been selling a different way or managing a different way their entire careers, and they changed, right? And they figured it out and they adopted it.
Sure. So obviously, before we started the research for this podcast, we always thought that Medic was the key component. But actually, what we've quickly discovered is that Medic by itself isn't enough. Having a good playbook is important. That's the only way you can scale your businesses, and having a method. But actually, there's a lot more to the story. And I think this is what the realization that we've had more than anything. So what do you think is needed to make a playbook like Medic work?
Well, I mean, if you just want to pick on Medic and qualification, which is what it is, we used something similar to that at one of my, non-PTC BladeLogic, companies. We had it built into Salesforce. You couldn't move, an opportunity from one stage to another unless you checked the little boxes, right, of Medic or Medpic, whatever it was at the time. But if you don't have the discipline to actually disqualify or requalify, then it's useless, right? So I think it's not really about the methodology as much as it is about how you operate the methodology, and having sales discipline is something that I've seen it in action, and I've seen it not in action in many cases. And you can take the same exact qualification methodology, and sometimes it'll work brilliantly, and sometimes it just won't because it's just not operated properly.
But sales discipline is not something which is found in experience. Actually, just going back to what you said about PTC hiring you without any real experience, if you were to kind of reflect on most of the organizations that this group have kind of taken over and had success in, they are very, very specific in the type of traits that they look for individuals. Most organizations look for individuals that are going to hit the ground running or can ramp up really quickly. But actually, the BladeLogic guys, they scale companies faster than anyone, and yet experience is a lot lower down the list of what they're looking for. They're looking for character. They're looking for the ability to be moldable. They're looking for intelligence. And I think, just reflecting on the point you just made, Medic isn't enough, but it's that trait. And actually, they're very, very specific in what you guys are specific in what you look for when you are scaling your teams, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, I think that these guys, we did a good job at it, right? And it was part of the culture, right? Was to find, we used to just call it athletes. Like, finding a good athlete is better than finding a learned scholar in some cases, because they have desire, right? And they have skills, right? But they may not have experience, and that's okay because we can, because of the way the model is constructed. You're never really out there on your own, right? There's always a way. There's such a huge investment in training and willingness to continue to train and educate, and discipline around training, and then having a span of control for managers that allows you to actually be in the business of your young athletes. It allows you to mold them right in the right way versus trying to change somebody, right, who's already has a certain mindset, right, and operates a certain way and isn't comfortable, changing.
So if you look at BladeLogic, he's got a very specific kind of measure that he looks now in his recruitment strategy, which is he uses an acronym called ICE, intelligence, character, coachability, experience. That seems to be quite a common thing. Again, is that something that was really evident and very purposeful at the beginning at PTC, or is this just an evolution over kind of the three phases of the three iterations of this kind of strategy?
Yeah, I think it was purposeful at PTC. Because we spent a lot of time, doing the hiring is step one, right? Doing the training is step two, and then it's doing the constant assessment, right, of how that person is transforming. and then making determinations of whether they're going to make it or not, and making them like as early as possible. So it sounds a little cultish in a way, but it was really about ensuring that we really understood the psyche of the person, their whether they had mental blocks that were going to keep them from kind of getting to the next level, whether they had the desire to get to the next level, whether they had fear that they weren't going to get to the next level. Those are the sort of attributes, right, that they kind of focused in on, not necessarily how good is his elevator pitch or how strong is his demo skills or whatever the case may be. It was those other intangibles that kind of separated just a salesperson from someone who's going to make a difference, right, and end up being a CRO someday potentially.
Yeah. So, if we were to kind of recap on your career, right? So, Royal Navy, hired into PTC entry level. You became regional leader within 7 years, responsible for around 600 people. Bounced around, ended up at BladeLogic, and within 5 years, you found yourself kind of VP of Global Services. Was Everbridge natural progression for you, or did you have to kind of adapt and change to take the next step?
Yeah, not really. I mean, I think where I had to make changes, for me. So I think of like my time between when I got out of high school to when I left PTC is like the growing and development years of my career. That's when I really learned how to do my what I do, right? And it was after that, those years in which we all kind of scattered and we all had different experiences, and I worked for companies that were in different technology spaces, different sizes, and the technology high tech wasn't that great during that period of time. It was okay, but it wasn't like it is now or was back in the late 90s. And I look at those years as when I had to really adapt, right? When I learned what my weaknesses were, where I needed to shore up. I learned when I left PTC that my military sort of style, having sort of a command and control type of management thought process worked pretty good, right? Because we had that type of culture there where it was acceptable, right? I went to this company, Bow Street, which was a very, very a much more liberal culture, much more about sort of communication and feelings, and it was so foreign to me that I struggled, right, as an effective leader because I didn't have those skills, right? I didn't recognize them as important, and I didn't try to develop them really right away, and I didn't do as well. The company did horribly, faster than I did horribly, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But I took that as an opportunity to learn and discover how I can evolve, right, as a manager and as a leader, because it's not just one way, right? And just because it worked at one place doesn't mean it's going to work, everywhere else. So when I joined Everbridge, in the first really 3 years of my time at Everbridge, it really wasn't any different. It was just another company, right, that I had the same job at, which was kind of running customer operations and starting small and trying to build it for scale. And it was during that period of time where I've always had a strong desire to do more than just be sort of an operational professional services leader, right? And until the middle of my tenure at Everbridge, I was that, right? And I ultimately made the decision and talked to the CEO and asked him for his help, right? In kind of expanding my responsibility, learning new things, getting involved in things that are beyond just sort of the customer ops stuff. And he gave me that opportunity. But if I hadn't asked for it, I never would have gotten it, right? So that was kind of a turning point for me where I felt kind of stale, right, in what I've accomplished and where I was going. And he gave me the opportunity to do more stuff, and that's what got me to the next step. For sure, was building my resume with things outside of just running a professional services P&L or running customer support.
You're talking about taking that step up to strategy, right? So moving away from more of an operational kind of mindset, I have to deliver this for my clients, to, okay, let's think about the bigger picture. I mean, that's not a natural it is a natural progression, but a lot of technical people struggle to make that step up. How is it you were able to make that step?
Well, it was with a lot of support. So, I mean, I would say my role was more like the chief of staff, CEO. I had some other, real responsibilities on top of that, but he didn't go out of his way to mentor me. But because I was sort of, doing a lot of the things that he would normally be doing, I got a chance to learn, and he gave me good feedback on what he wanted and what he didn't. And through that, I got some really great, experience. And it was a really strong management team as well, with lots of, smart people with a ton of experience that I learned a lot from when I worked, with them on their particular part of the business. When I worked with the guy who ran SaaS ops, for example, he's a guy who's done this forever and knows everything there is to know about running a hosted, operation and build data centers, and amazing guy. I learned so much from him. So I was able to just get in a position and a set of activities that just allowed me to learn more. Rather than just focusing on my stuff, that I'm good at, I know, right? And just trying to execute efficiently. So it was a great opportunity that he gave me. And then getting involved in a lot of the M&A. I mean, at BMC, we did a good bit of M&A, and I got involved in a lot of the due diligence and integration processes. But with Everbridge, I got to get involved more upfront in sort of the business development piece as well. So how we evaluate prospects, how you build a pipeline of acquisition candidates, all the way through the due diligence and structuring deals. So that was a great experience as well.
So were you able to actually influence the sales strategy there?
I tried.
Yeah, right.
I think just to a great extent. I think I was able to influence. I think some of the mechanics of how we sell. In other words, what's our value proposition? How do we position this product? What are the things that we want to try to capitalize when we compete with other vendors for the same business. But as it relates to the methodology and kind of how the team was managed, all the things that are in that kind of PTC model, it frustrated me a little bit because I so much wanted to embed some of those things into what we did, but the leadership, it just wasn't their style, right? So they were successful despite that, so it's not the only way to do things. But it was a frustration a little bit for me because I felt like we could have done so much better if we had some of those, at least some of those elements implemented. And that's the example I use where we had Medic, implemented in Salesforce. It just wasn't used very well.
Do you think that would influence a decision on your next moves and what happens to you next? If the company embraces that, will you be more? Would it be more of interest to you?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I'm hoping that my next move, I'll get to decide. Frankly.
Nice, good.
So, if you were to look at the kind of top 100 software companies, most of them probably have a playbook like the one that we're talking about. In most of them, there's some sort of influence from the PTC, BladeLogic, AppD people, or someone that's developed under their leadership. So, we are talking about a very, very significant impact that a very small crop of people, a lot of it probably comes back to John McMahon, who's probably, the thought leader of a lot of this. But again, what role does the COO play in all of this? How does the COO bind this all together?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think the COO role is a very loosely defined one. So from one company to another, the span of responsibilities, I guess, from one COO to the next is quite different. Even within the Vista portfolio, we meet. All of the CxOs meet, every year at a conference and for workshops and best practices. And I'm in a COO kind of subgroup. And, even within the Vista portfolio, the differences in responsibilities are quite varied, right? But it's mostly focused on customer operations. So COOs are a lot of the times interchangeable with CxOs, today. So it's a lot about customer success and customer operations, and typically it spills over into other parts of what we call business operations or sales ops, right? So it's really all about sort of the efficient running of the organization. So as it relates to to sales, there's a process component, there's a data component that the COO oftentimes manages that really facilitates improved sales performance. And as the COO, you're typically in sort of a role where you're sort of the right-hand man of the CEO, or maybe the counterbalance to the CEO. Helping the CEO sort of see more clearly what's happening operationally within the company, right? When they're more focused on strategy and sort of investors and kind of external, stakeholders. So I think you can have a lot of influence, right? Whether it's under your direct responsibility or sort of inherent in your role because you're touching so many parts of the business, right?
Sure. So there's kind of three components to you, really. So you've obviously got the very, very deeply technical sides. Okay, you've got the the commercial acumen to be able to really translate technical issues, but more from a value proposition. And you've got the kind of a general kind of intelligence, which has now allowed you to kind of evolve and reinvent yourself. Do you think that these have been kind of the key components which have helped you to continue to kind of scale up the ladder and break through that glass ceiling?
Yeah, I think so. I think the one thing that you can't ever really fake is, carrying a bag, right? Having a quota, and, living as, a quota carrying salesperson or manager, within the go-to-market function. So that's an area that I think you can rub shoulders, with those guys. And that's how I've operated. And I've had some, responsibility for building my own book of business inside these companies. I'm responsible for getting my own professional services business and making sure that I'm influencing the sellers, right, to help support that. But that's definitely a missing component, right, for me, right, is actually being on the front lines and and owning a commercial relationship with a customer, or driving a new commercial relationship with a customer. So I think that's one area where until you've actually done that, right, it's something that's sort of not present on your credentials, on your resume.
So obviously you enable, you're part of the sales organization, but not necessarily part of the organization. You're the one that's kind of patching up or making sure that obviously the value is realized of what these sales guys are obviously going out. So you kind of get a slightly different perspective, because in a way you're not necessarily in the trenches, but you can obviously, see it more of have a kind of a bird's eye view of that. Do you think that's an advantage?
It is, for sure. I mean, I think it's even more than what you described. It's in many cases you're the product, right? So or at least a big part of the product, right? So we're a big part of the solution. And you in many cases, or when I say myself, my organization has objectives that compete, right, to some extent, with the sales objectives, right? They just need to get a deal. I need to deliver something at a profit margin, right? So there has to be, like, in many cases, I don't want to say an adversarial relationship, but in many cases we're a counterbalance, right? To the sales team. We support them. We're sometimes the brains, right, of the outfit in terms of how do we form a solution and make the customer comfortable, right, that we can deliver, and then we have to deliver afterwards, right? And we're held typically to a profitability standard where the sales team hardly ever is, right? As long as they can get the purchase order or the contract signed, they're going to get their commission check, right? So I think being able to be that counterbalance but still be a partner, right, and be a trusted partner of the sales team, I think is probably one of the most critical sort of attributes that someone in my role, right, needs to have. Because I've seen many people fail because they become adversarial, and then they get ignored, right? They get turned off. Like the sales guys will just say, "Well, I can't work with this guy. He's not going to help me."
Yeah, you can very easily become the police officer, right, as opposed to the enabler.
Yeah,
that's the challenge.
Yeah, it's the hardest. It's definitely the hardest part of the job. And in the BladeLogic days, and maybe not as much in PTC because it was a little bit more. There's just so much business, right, that it kind of was easier. But in the BladeLogic days, because we were expanding, because I was putting, people into roles in parts of the world that maybe weren't quite ready, and I was going to mentor them up. It was, and these guys were going at 100 miles an hour because they already knew what they needed to do. Kind of keeping pace with that was really challenging, right? And created, it was a lot of work for me, right, to continue to sort of keep these guys, comfortable, with my organization's ability to deliver as fast as they can deliver. And that was one of the big challenges there, for sure.
So if you were to just kind of take a bit of a step back and just reflect on the topic that we're obviously talking about and really reflect on the success that this group have had, how would you best summarize why this group have had the success that they've had? Because it's not that they're part of a boys' club. They're not, golf buddies. They've got a formula. There's a lot more to it. How would you summarize that, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, it started with a little bit of luck. Right? So I think PTC was just a special situation, right? And I think that special situation enabled, a bunch of smart people, right, to try to innovate, a model that was going to work, right, in that situation. And it just happened to be, a very repeatable kind of need in high tech, right, over the next 20 years, right? So in a way, it was a little bit of luck. But it all boils down to sort of the willingness and ability of the people who were managing that business at the time to be open-minded, to be thoughtful, to be innovative, right, and to continue to not just try new things, but measure and determine is it working, is it not? How do we adjust? What kind of what kind of changes do we need to make, and what impact are those changes having, right, on our success or failure? So I think the fact that we were very sort of metrics driven and it was a relatively simple model, it wasn't really highly complex, a lot of complex analysis, but it was something that was constantly measured, right, and constantly being adjusted and tweaked until we got fine-tuned results. And I think that created just a belief, right, among everyone involved that it was totally doable again, right, in another circumstance, and should be taken forward, right, for the rest of their careers. It just became, I don't want to call it a cult, right, but it just became, a club, right, that everybody knows the initiation rights to, right? Everybody knows what the rules are, right? And, you're allowed to go off in your own business and use it as a baseline and tweak it and, change it, to whatever suits the situation. But it's always at the core is the fundamentals are all there.
It's like baking a cake. Sorry. There's lots of different ways. Yeah. There's lots of different ways of baking a cake, but the fundamentals are there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just to kind of get a little bit behind the person behind this, the COO, Jeff. So, what is it that really gets you up? What is it that really inspires you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the COO role, like we said, is so integral to other parts of all parts of the organization, whether you own it directly or not. Seeing operational efficiency improvements, right, is what we're about, right, and being able to measure and understand where there's room for improvement, and then drive programs and initiatives to improve. Right, it's core to my job function, and I really enjoy it. I mean, I like to solve problems, and if there aren't enough problems to solve, I like to go find some, right, to solve. So I don't mind doing both, and I think that's what gives me a lot of satisfaction is to see that improvement, to see, people, adopt, new programs and new initiatives because they do see, things working better, changing people's minds about, the way they're doing business and seeing if they're willing to adopt something new. I think those are the things that I really, get excited about and enjoy doing.
Nice. And so obviously it's a very, very demanding job, and it's obviously very, very strenuous on time. And how do you stop yourself from burning out? Do you take yourself away? Are you able to switch off? Do you have any special techniques that you use to enable you to do that?
It's difficult, frankly. I mean, and in a global organization, especially, it's very easy to be up and working around the clock, right? Because we've got, at any point in time, day or night, there's people in the company working, right? So you could be engaged, anytime, day or night, if you wanted to be engaged with somebody who's actually on the clock. But I do think it's important, right, to establish, time, especially now when we're sort of cooped up in our homes.
Yeah.
And a lot of real social interaction other than staring at our computer. To call a time, like what I do now is I call a time during the day from 5 to 7. I don't do anything, right? I go for a walk, I go for a run. Can't go to the gym anymore, but I do something where I can exercise, right? And then get back to it, a little bit later on, right? And catch up on emails and do some other things in the evening. So I think you just have to, you have to block time out for yourself and turn things off and put your phone away.
So important.
Yeah.
Palladino has 2 phones. He has one which is his personal phone and one which is his work phone, and he uses those, so that he can take a step away. But then he did allude to the fact that his colleagues do have his personal phone number as well, but at least he hasn't got his emails on that one. So it did make the difference. I think sometimes that can play a big difference. What sort of advice would you give to those, aspiring to break that glass ceiling? If there was 3 words of wisdom, words of advice, what would they be?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think you have to have a desire to win, right? And you have to know what winning means. Like, what does winning mean to you? And then be just constantly focused on how you're gonna increase the score, right? So you beat your competitor, right?
Yeah.
And like what I learned, I reached a plateau in my career where I wasn't winning anymore. I was just kind of running in place. And until I asked for help, I wasn't going to get any, right? So I don't think it's a sign of weakness to say, hey, I need your help to get me to the next level, or I need your help to find me the next opportunity. Just ask people for help. Everyone's willing to help. It's a great technical community. Technology community is amazing. It's so small when you really think about it, and it's really tight knit. I find the same thing within the Vista portfolio. I mean, it's an amazing culture as well. It's very similar to my prior experience in a way, because there's just such strong leadership and desire to win is just dripping, from the place.
Yeah.
And then when you put all of the executives in a room, which we do a couple of times a year with the other portfolio companies, you just feed off of their enthusiasm and their drive. It's just amazing.
Yeah. And is the complete Vista portfolio of software companies, does that make you the third largest? Is it the third largest software company theoretically?
Fourth largest, yeah.
Fourth.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So I suppose the final question is: does the hunter make the unicorn? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think there's a couple of requirements, right? You have to have a healthy market, and I won't even say you have to have a good product, but you have to have a healthy market. But after that, I think the hunter does make the unicorn. So
okay, right. So if we were to kind of reflect, Jeff, now looking back at the overall picture, there's a lot of common traits when you look at the individuals that we're referring to as part of this series. This series obviously dedicated to those 33. Much of that legacy obviously started with John McMahon himself. But despite the fact that so many of you have very different backgrounds, you all kind of entered in a very similar way, not really knowing your path, not really knowing your direction, but really having some very, very raw attributes. And if we were to reflect on, your experience coming out of the military, taking that experience, and using the intelligence, using your ability to be competitive, to continue to reinvent yourself. And yes, you experienced difficulties along the way, but you always found a way to be able to break through that, whether that was asking for help or asking for support. You were always willing to kind of reflect and continue to grow. And I think that if you were to reflect on the overall group, these are traits that probably most of that group have. So I'd like to just say, first of all, it's been great to have you on the show. It's been, fantastic to hear your story. You've been a great guest to have on the show. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah. Great talking to you guys.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Really do appreciate your time. It's been really insightful. And thanks ever so much for sparing your time to do this with us.
Can't wait to hear the whole series.